Welcome back to Access and Empowering South Africans, a special broadcast brought to you by the Eastern Cape Department of Government Communication and Information System. South Africa is leading the G20 and has prioritized focusing on women's advancement, including addressing gender-based violence and femicide. GCIS is coordinating the government's response to gender-based violence by hosting discussions like the one we are having tonight. No single entity can end GBVF alone, and the private sector plays an essential role in supporting local government to combat gender-based violence and femicide in society. I'm now in studio joined by Prof Ncwadi, Professor of Economics at NMU. Professor, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you so much.
Well, Professor, as you know that the first G20 Employment Working Group meeting was held right here in Gqeberha and focusing on labor and employment issues. Now, one of the top priorities of the meeting was to discuss gender equality and closing the pay gap, tackling job segregation and boosting women's participation in science, technology, as well as engineering fields. Now, Professor, do you think meetings like this will create awareness to close the pay gap for women in the private sector?
Yes, indeed, they will. We need more meetings like that, more platforms where these things are discussed rather than to be kept in silence. Because one of the important things when you develop an economy, it is to ensure that you reduce the inequality gap, you reduce poverty gap, and also, more importantly, you transform the economy. So without that transformation, we cannot talk about development. Many times we are misled to talk too much about economic growth, forgetting that there are certain things that are kind of shortcomings in economic growth alone, because that economic growth means how much you have generated within that year in South Africa. So the division of that income is very important to consider. And also to translate that growth into development. So one of the manifestations of development is to ensure that we transform the society. It is very sad, 30 years of democracy, that we still find pay gap between male and female. And I say this by virtue of the fact that if you look into labor force participation rate, you'll find that there's more men that are participating in the labor force than women. A couple of years ago, we asked ourselves a question to say, why is it that now that there are more opportunities for women that's open, yet if you look at statistics, you'll find that the labor force participation for women is still low. And it could be that because of the wage gap between male and female, and which must be addressed. And there must be transparency when it comes to wage bill in terms of that distribution of income to ensure that the companies and firms are accountable to meet the agenda of the national priority, the national agenda, to close that gap. But because there's no transparency, one doesn't know really to say, has that gap been narrowed down or is it widening? So we need to look at various reasons to say why is there low participation of women in the labor force? And I think the pay is one of those things. I therefore think that meetings as G20, which is had recently, is one of the effort and a step towards addressing this. And those meetings were quite effective because we had various speakers from various countries and all saying the same thing. And I hope and I trust that the resolutions taken there and those findings reported, the recommendations, will find their way to policy.
Well, Professor, speaking of the effectiveness of such meetings to be held, what do you think it means to South Africa to host G20?
It means a lot. It means that South Africa is part of the global player. We are a growing economy. We are a developing economy. I'm happy that we do not sit and then feel sorry for ourselves, but we are out there with the big giants in the economy. Those guys, those countries, the G20, they have very high GDP. And there's no point for us to sit back and complain and say, oh, we're a small country, we're a developing country. We are playing part in the global space. And also, it is a platform where we can make our voice heard. And therefore, when they make global policies, we are considered as well as South Africa. I think it's very important for South Africa to be part of that G20. And I think it helps as well to share our problems and also get ideas from the G20 countries as to how they overcome these challenges.
Well, Professor, let's now try to narrow it down to Nelson Mandela
Yeah.
Bay. How did the business sector in the Nelson Mandela Bay benefit from the meetings that were held in G20?
You know, when you have meetings like this, G20, or you have a pool of international players in the city, definitely it's going to have economic impact. Why? Because it boosts the tourism sector. These people use our hotels, our B&B, guest houses, and not only that, they also buy some of the goods from our Gqeberha city, and they take it away back to their countries. So definitely, I think to me it was an opportunity for businesses to really have made their gain because of the foreign nationals that were in the city. And it was an opportunity, in fact, for businesses to market themselves, to and inform the people that we are here and these are the services that we are providing. So I think, not having any evidence in terms of figures, but in my opinion, definitely it has had a very good impact in this economy in the metro.
Well, Professor, one of the most key priorities meetings held in the G20 was the Employment Working Group. Now, youth unemployment was another key priority here. And do you think this meeting will bring new solutions to tackle the unemployment rate in the metro?
Yeah, youth unemployment is a worry. It's a worry here and in other countries as well, that the bulk of the young people, more than 50% of them are unemployed, whereas they are holding degrees and skills, and those skills are not benefiting society in any way because they go into unemployment. We have to ask ourselves a question. As one of the ways to address this, one, are the skills that we produce in line with what the market demands? That's one part of the question. The second one is there appetite to employ? People talk about, oh, well, they want experience and so on. Besides that, did you create enough appetite to employ? How do we do that? We do that by assisting the employers, by ensuring that we add the infrastructure, ensuring that we invite more investors to come in and plow their money to create those jobs. Without investment that are flowing here, it's not going to work. And also, it started at the municipal level with those kind of concessions for those firms to come and run their businesses on our grounds through tax and rates, concessions, to make sure that we retain them here. That's the only way, not just in the city of Gqeberha, but in the province as well, to make sure that we pull those investments here. So it's important that a platform like G20 Working Group, it was important because we could present our results and we could present our findings in terms of the plight of the young people that are unemployed. And of course, the recommendations we brought in our papers, I'm sure they will find their way to policymakers who will then translate those things into actionable policies.
Well, Professor, just before I can be able to let you go, I know that you already touched on this one, but I would like us to now go in depth. Well, there were a lot of international officials who attended the G20 meeting and will continue to attend such meetings in future. Now, Professor, do you think these meetings will strengthen the tourism sector's contribution to economic growth and job creation in the metro?
Certainly. You know, the tourism sector at the moment is one of the sectors that are still labor intensive. Remember that South Africa has got a very high level of labor available and willing to work, but they're unemployed. As much as we go into digitalization, digital economy, but the tourism sector for me for a long time is going to remain labor intensive. You need people. So I think that definitely the tourism sector will definitely benefit. Whenever you have international guests coming to visit, you know, so your transport sector is going to gain through the multiplier effect, you know, your transport sector, your B&Bs, your guest houses, your hotels, your shoppings around, your restaurants, right? All of them are set to gain 1 cent or 2 cent gain in their profits because of this in undertaking like these. Functions and events usually lead themselves to high demand, which then will definitely yield higher profits for the businesses.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for your time. We have to leave it there.
Thank you.
Now, as we have to leave it there, it's now time to go to the short break. We will return once again with more on this important discussion. Please do stay tuned.